Most people spend their lives chasing what they call security. They wake up every morning, go to work, and tell themselves they are building a future, a house, a pension, a plan. But one day, they wake up at 65 and realize that the life they built was not truly theirs. They worked for decades, not for fulfillment, but for survival. And in the end, they find themselves rich in routine, but poor in purpose. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And that is what most of us do. We spend our most precious years running from ourselves, trading our dreams for comfort and calling it a career. But comfort without meaning is the slowest form of dying. Most people live under the comforting illusion that security is something they can earn, a paycheck, a pension, a title, a home. They devote their entire existence to chasing stability, believing that if they just work long enough, save enough, and follow the rules, life will reward them with peace and safety. But as the years pass, that illusion begins to crack. The job that once seemed stable is no longer guaranteed. The savings that once looked sufficient vanish under inflation, and the energy that once fueled ambition fades away. And when they finally reach the age of 65, they discover the painful truth. They were never truly secure. They were simply compliant. They followed the system, obeyed the rules, and sacrificed their souls to an illusion that never cared for them in return. Carl Jung often spoke about how people avoid confronting their inner selves by building walls of distraction. The daily grind becomes one of those walls. It gives the illusion of purpose while numbing the deeper hunger for meaning. When a person loses themselves in endless labor, they convince themselves they're being responsible, that they're doing what's right. But inside, their spirit knows the difference between safety and stagnation. True security doesn't come from what you own. It comes from knowing who you are and what you're capable of becoming. You can't insure your soul against fear. You can only face it. The illusion of security is powerful because it's comfortable. It tells you that if you just follow the path society has laid out, get an education, find a job, climb the ladder, you'll be safe. Yet millions follow this same script only to find emptiness waiting at the end. They were taught how to earn money but never how to understand themselves. They were trained to survive, not to live. And when they finally stop working, they don't know who they are without the structure of their job. They discover that their identity was never their own. It was assigned to them by a world that profits from conformity. Jung believed that every human being has a deeper self, an inner guide that whispers the truth of who we could become. But to hear that voice, we must be willing to break the illusion that safety is the goal. The purpose of life is not to feel secure. It's to grow, to risk, to awaken. Growth always involves uncertainty. It means walking into the unknown without the guarantee of success, trusting that meaning itself will be the reward. When you build your life only around what feels safe, you build a prison and call it stability. Think about how many people spend decades doing work that doesn't inspire them. They trade their youth for a salary, their passion for approval, and their creativity for predictability. They silence the voice inside that says, "You were meant for more," because that voice threatens the comfort of routine. And yet, that same routine slowly kills their spirit. By the time they realize what they've lost, they are too tired, too cautious, too conditioned to change. Jung would say they've spent their lives serving the persona, the mask society expects them to wear, while the true self remains buried beneath fear and habit. Real security comes when you no longer depend on the outside world to validate your worth. It's when you realize that your mind, your creativity, your courage, these are your true assets. They cannot be taken, outsourced, or retired. You don't need to wait until 65 to find peace. You need to wake up now and question everything you've been told about what it means to live a successful life. The system teaches you how to be useful to it, not how to be fulfilled within yourself. That's why so many end up with nothing, not because they didn't work hard, but because they worked for the wrong things. When you see through the illusion of security, you begin to reclaim your power. you realize that safety without meaning is a hollow victory. You may have a house, but no home inside yourself. You may have money, but no sense of direction. You may have status, but no connection to your soul. And then comes the most important moment, the choice to stop living on autopilot, the moment you decide that your life will no longer be a repetition of what others expect. You begin to live authentically. Jung would remind us that facing the truth of our own lives can be terrifying, but it's the only way to become whole. You can spend a lifetime avoiding uncertainty, or you can embrace it and discover your potential. Security is not found in a job, a pension, or a plan. It's found in self-awareness and the courage to act upon it. The person who knows who they are and lives by that truth will never end up with nothing, no matter what they lose. Because even if the world changes, even if the system collapses, their foundation, the soul, remains unshaken. The tragedy is not that people work until 65. The tragedy is that they never truly lived before then. They were too busy seeking safety to experience freedom. But it's never too late to wake up. The illusion can be broken the moment you choose to see it for what it is, a story that was never yours to begin with. The real work of life begins when you stop chasing stability and start seeking meaning. When you do, you'll realize that you were never meant to merely survive. You were meant to evolve. The greatest tragedy of life is not that we grow old, but that we reach old age without ever having lived as our true selves. Most people move through life wearing masks of responsibility, politeness, ambition, and approval. They become who others expect them to be, the good employee, the reliable friend, the obedient child. They chase careers they do not love, tolerate situations that drain them, and follow rules they never questioned. Then one day, when the noise fades and the mirror of time stands still, they see the reflection of a stranger staring back. That stranger is the person they could have been, the artist who never painted, the writer who never wrote, the dreamer who was silenced by fear. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unlived life that lingers within us, waiting to be acknowledged. The shadow is not evil, it is simply the part of us we refuse to see. It holds our passions, our impulses, our forgotten talents, and our buried truths. Society teaches us to repress these things because they do not fit the mold of success. We are told to be practical, to follow the system, to color within the lines. But every time we suppress what we truly feel, we create an inner wound. That wound festers into regret, and regret is the heaviest burden the soul can carry. The man who ignores his shadow spends his life chasing shadows in the world, money, status, validation. But he never finds peace because what he truly seeks is hidden within himself. By the time many people reach retirement, they have fulfilled everyone else's expectations but none of their own. They were the model citizen, the loyal worker, the dependable parent. Yet deep inside there is an emptiness, a quiet realization that they have been acting in a play they didn't write. The applause fades, the roles dissolve, and what remains is the uncomfortable question, who am I really? Jung believed that facing this question is the beginning of true awakening. To confront your shadow is to reclaim your soul, but most never do. They fear what they might find, the anger, the passion, the desires they buried long ago. They would rather cling to the familiar identity they built, even if it brings them misery, because it feels safe. But the shadow never disappears. It follows you, whispering reminders of what you denied yourself. It appears as frustration, anxiety, or bitterness. It shows up in the moments you feel unfulfilled but cannot explain why. It is the voice that says, there has to be more than this. And there is. But to find it, you must have the courage to face yourself. That means admitting the truth that much of what you called success was a disguise for fear. You feared being different, so you conformed. You feared rejection, so you played small. You feared failure, so you never truly tried. These fears build the walls that keep the shadow locked away. But the soul cannot be silenced forever. At some point, the pain of pretending becomes greater than the fear of being real. When you finally look inward and face what you've been avoiding, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel alive again. The energy that once went into suppressing your truth transforms into creative power. You start to see that the parts of yourself you once rejected, your curiosity, your sensitivity, your defiance, were never weaknesses. They were clues to your purpose. Jung believed that the goal of life is individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, light and shadow alike. Only then can you live a life of authenticity instead of imitation. Those who ignore this inner work spend decades chasing external rewards only to feel empty when they finally achieve them. They believed success would bring happiness, but success without self-understanding brings only exhaustion. They sacrificed their individuality for approval, their passion for security, their imagination for predictability, and when it's all over, they look back and wonder where their real life went. That is the silent tragedy of modern existence, to have everything society promised and yet feel nothing inside. But there is hope. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your teacher. It invites you to explore the depths of who you are and to embrace the parts you were taught to fear. When you stop running from yourself, you begin to heal. You start to see that life is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. The person who dares to face their shadow will never end up with nothing, no matter how much they lose materially, because they have found something far greater, the truth of their own being. To live without regret is to live with awareness. It means asking yourself every day, am I being true to my nature, or am I living for someone else's approval? The answer to that question determines the quality of your life. You cannot control time, fate, or fortune, but you can control whether you live honestly, and if you do, you will find that meaning, not money, is the true wealth of the soul. When you live in alignment with who you are, you no longer fear reaching 65, because you have already lived deeply, consciously, and courageously. The man or woman who has embraced their shadow does not age with regret, they age with wisdom. They do not look back and see emptiness, they see a life that was fully their own. Life does not truly begin until you stop living according to the expectations of others and start listening to the voice within. From the moment we are born, we are shaped by the world around us, by parents, teachers, traditions, and society. We are told who we should become, what success looks like, and how to live a good life. We learn to chase grades, promotions, and approval, believing that these things will give our lives meaning. But there comes a point, usually in adulthood, when an unsettling emptiness begins to whisper within us. We feel that something is missing, even when everything seems fine. That quiet discomfort is the voice of the inner self calling out to be heard. Carl Jung called this awakening individuation, the process of becoming your true self. It is not about becoming perfect or impressive, it is about becoming real. The inner self is not loud. It does not demand attention like the ego does. It speaks softly, through intuition, through feelings of longing, through moments of inspiration or dissatisfaction. Most people silence that voice because it disrupts the comfortable rhythm of conformity. They tell themselves that they'll listen later, after they retire, after they make enough money, after they raise their children. But later becomes never, and the voice grows fainter with time. The tragedy is not that we lose touch with our dreams, it's that we forget they were ever ours to begin with. Jung believed that this suppression of the inner voice leads to the emptiness so many feel in midlife. The famous midlife crisis is not about age, but about awakening. It is the moment the soul refuses to stay silent any longer. Awakening the inner self requires courage, because it often means dismantling the life you've built around false values. It means asking questions that have no easy answers. Who am I without my job? What do I actually believe? What do I truly desire? These questions unsettle the ego, because the ego thrives on labels, roles, and identities. The inner self, however, is not defined by any of these. It is timeless, vast, and free. When you begin to listen to it, you might realize that your current path no longer aligns with who you really are. That realization can be frightening, because it threatens everything you've worked for. But Jung would say that refusing this call leads to spiritual decay. You may preserve your outer life, but your inner life will wither. To awaken your inner self, you must first create space for silence. Modern life is filled with noise, constant distraction, endless comparison, and external validation. You cannot hear your soul if your mind is always occupied. The path to self-discovery begins in stillness. It might come through journaling, meditation, solitude, or honest reflection. In these moments, you begin to see that your thoughts, fears, and desires are not random. They are messages from within, guiding you toward wholeness. And as you listen more deeply, you'll realize that your work, your relationships, and your choices must all align with this truth if you want to live meaningfully. Awakening the inner self does not mean rejecting the world or abandoning your responsibilities. It means infusing everything you do with consciousness. It means doing your work not just for survival, but as an expression of who you are. Jung taught that the purpose of work is not merely to earn money, but to participate in the creation of meaning. When your work reflects your essence, it nourishes you. When it does not, it drains you. That is why so many people reach the end of their careers feeling empty. They worked hard but never connected their labor to their spirit. Real work, the kind that fulfills you, is born from self-awareness. It is the outward reflection of an inward truth. Many resist this awakening because it demands change. It may require walking away from things that no longer serve you, a job, a relationship, an identity. But to cling to what is false is to die slowly. Jung often said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Yet the moment you stop running and face yourself, life transforms. You begin to see beauty in places you once overlooked. You start to make choices that align with your integrity rather than your insecurity. You discover that meaning, not comfort, is what sustains the human spirit. When you live from the inner self, you no longer fear aging or loss. You no longer measure your worth by titles or possessions. You realize that your greatest wealth is your consciousness, the awareness that you are living in harmony with your true nature. Every day becomes sacred, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. You find joy in simplicity, strength in authenticity, and peace in being who you are. Those who ignore the inner call end up living someone else's story. They become actors in a play written by society, applauded for their performance but empty when the curtain falls. Those who listen, however, become the authors of their own destiny. They may face uncertainty, failure, or misunderstanding, but they will also experience something far greater, the profound satisfaction of a life lived consciously. To awaken the inner self is to awaken to life itself. And in that awakening you discover that you were never lost, only asleep. There is a quiet kind of suffering that exists in the modern world. The kind that comes from living a life of endless repetition without meaning. People wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat the same routine for decades. They measure their worth by productivity, their success by approval, and their purpose by paychecks. They work tirelessly, yet they feel hollow inside. They follow the same pattern because it feels safe, because everyone else is doing it, because they believe that one day all the sacrifice will finally pay off. But that day rarely comes. What they call discipline is often disguised despair, the slow decay of the spirit beneath the illusion of responsibility. Carl Jung would say this is the cost of living unconsciously, of allowing the machine of society to dictate the rhythm of one's soul. To work without meaning is to be spiritually asleep. It is to mistake movement for progress and effort for purpose. People labor endlessly, yet they do not grow. They accumulate more, yet feel less alive. They chase promotions, recognition, and possessions, but the hunger inside remains. That hunger is not for material things. It is for connection, creativity, and significance. The soul does not thrive on schedules and salaries. It thrives on purpose. And when purpose is missing, no amount of work can fill the void. The tragedy is not in hard work itself. Work can be sacred when it expresses your truth, but in the kind of work that silences your soul while feeding your fear. Fear is the engine that drives mindless labor. People fear failure, so they cling to routine. They fear judgment, so they suppress their individuality. They fear uncertainty, so they choose the predictable over the possible. And as the years pass, they mistake this cycle of fear for a life of stability. They become efficient, obedient, and exhausted, loyal to systems that see them as replaceable. They forget that they are not cogs in a machine but creators capable of shaping their own path. Jung would say that this loss of individuality, this surrender of the inner voice to collective norms, is one of the deepest forms of suffering. It is the death of authenticity disguised as the pursuit of success. Breaking this cycle requires awakening. It begins the moment you stop asking, "What must I do to survive?" and start asking, "What was I created to do?" That question terrifies most people because it demands honesty. It may force you to confront the reality that the work you've dedicated your life to does not align with who you are. It may require you to dismantle an identity built on false foundations. But that discomfort is sacred. It is the first breath of a soul remembering its power. To work meaningfully is not to escape effort, but to channel it towards something that matters to you. It is to make your labor a mirror of your inner truth. When you find meaning in what you do, work ceases to feel like imprisonment. It becomes expression, an act of creation rather than obligation. Jung believed that creativity is not limited to art. It is a fundamental human need. Every act done with awareness, from building to teaching to healing, can be creative when infused with soul. The problem is not that people work too much, it's that they work without consciousness. They pour energy into tasks that do not reflect their essence. They mistake busyness for purpose and productivity for value. But meaning does not come from how much you do. It comes from how deeply you connect to what you do. The system conditions people to believe that their worth lies in their output. You are praised when you sacrifice your time, rewarded when you suppress your needs, and told that rest is laziness. But the soul does not obey such logic. It withers when ignored. That is why burnout has become a silent epidemic. Not because people are weak, but because they are starved of meaning. They are doing everything right, yet feeling everything wrong. They have learned how to make a living, but not how to make a life. To break free, you must redefine work itself. Work is not meant to drain you, it is meant to shape you. It should challenge your mind, expand your spirit, and serve something larger than ego. When your work aligns with your essence, it becomes a form of devotion, not to a company, but to the self that seeks expression through it. That is the kind of labor that heals instead of harms. It does not lead to regret at 65, but to gratitude. Because you know your energy was spent in service of your truth. You were not born to simply pay bills and wait for weekends. You were born to create, to grow, to contribute something that carries your spirit into the world. The danger of mindless labor is that it numbs you to this truth. It convinces you that survival is enough. But survival is only the beginning. The human spirit was not designed for stagnation, it was designed for expansion. When you allow your work to reflect your purpose, every task becomes meaningful, every effort becomes sacred. You stop existing as a machine and start living as a creator. In the end, no one remembers how many hours you worked or how many promotions you earned. What they remember, and what your own soul remembers, is whether you lived with purpose. Did your work reflect your truth, or did it bury it? Did you create something that expressed your soul, or did you spend your life building someone else's dream? The answers to those questions determine whether you end up fulfilled or empty. Jung would say that true freedom begins the moment you remember who you are, not a worker, not a role, but a soul capable of creation. And once you awaken to that, you can never go back to living mechanically, because now you know that work without meaning is not life. It is merely existence, Freedom is not found in the promise of retirement or in the illusion of escape from responsibility. It is found in the present moment, in the ability to live in alignment with one's own truth. Most people spend their lives chasing freedom, believing it lies somewhere in the future, after the bills are paid, after the debts are cleared, after the work is done. They tell themselves, one day I'll be free, but that day never arrives, because the mindset that postpones freedom is the same one that prevents it. Freedom is not a destination, it is a state of consciousness. It is the courage to live according to your values rather than the values imposed upon you. Carl Jung would say that the person who conforms to collective expectations without question is a prisoner of the psyche. Even if the chains are invisible, the world teaches us to measure success in numbers, income, possessions, followers, titles, but these are only symbols of validation, not evidence of fulfillment. A person can have everything society praises and still feel nothing inside. Jung believed that this emptiness comes from living a life disconnected from the soul. When the outer world grows but the inner world remains neglected, the result is a quiet despair. True success, on the other hand, is harmony between inner and outer existence. It is when what you think, feel, and do are all aligned with your authentic nature. That alignment gives rise to peace. Not the peace of comfort or laziness, but the peace of integrity. It is the sense of knowing that your life, in all its imperfections, reflects who you truly are. Most people confuse freedom with the absence of work or obligation. They imagine that freedom begins when they stop working, when they can finally rest and enjoy life. But what if life was never meant to be something you escape from? What if the real purpose of work was not to earn leisure, but to express the deepest parts of your being? The problem is not that people work, it's that they work without purpose. They pour years of their lives into routines that do not represent them, into systems that do not value them, and into goals that do not fulfill them. They sacrifice their present for a future that is uncertain. By the time they reach that imagined day of freedom, they have already spent their best years in servitude to fear of poverty, of judgment, of failure. And fear, no matter how well dressed, is the opposite of freedom. Freedom begins when you stop being afraid of who you are. It begins when you stop asking for permission to live in a way that makes sense to your soul. Jung taught that the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, is the highest form of liberation. It means no longer seeking validation from the world, but finding meaning within yourself. It means making peace with solitude, uncertainty, and even failure, because these are not enemies but teachers. When you act from authenticity, you might lose comfort, approval, or familiarity, but you gain something infinitely greater, your own life. To live freely, you must also redefine success. Success is not the accumulation of things, but the realization of potential. It is not reaching a destination, but growing in consciousness. A successful life is not necessarily an easy one, it is a meaningful one. It is filled with lessons, risks, and moments of awakening that shape the soul. Jung often said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become what you truly are. This privilege is not granted automatically with age. It is earned through awareness and courage. The person who lives in alignment with their essence may have less in material terms, but will possess an abundance of spirit. Their wealth is measured not in possessions, but in peace. When you live authentically, your freedom becomes contagious. Others sense it, admire it, and are inspired by it, even if they cannot explain why. You become a mirror for what they secretly desire, a life of meaning, not just survival. And yet living freely does not mean rejecting society or renouncing all responsibility. It means engaging with the world consciously, choosing your actions from awareness instead of conditioning. You work not because you must, but because your work is an expression of your essence. You give, create, and build because these acts bring you alive. Freedom is not about escaping limits. It's about understanding them and moving within them gracefully. Even the most ordinary life can be extraordinary when lived with awareness. The artist painting in a small studio, the teacher inspiring young minds, the farmer tending to his crops, all can live in freedom if they do so with authenticity and love. The prison is never in circumstance, it is in the mind that believes it must be something it is not. In the end, those who live for freedom find that peace was never waiting at the end of the road, it was inside them all along. The people who work their whole lives hoping for liberation at 65 often discover too late that freedom is not something time grants you. It's something you claim now by living in truth. Jung would remind us that the greatest chains are psychological, not physical. They are the fears, the expectations, the unexamined beliefs that keep you small. To be free is to see through them, to act from your inner compass, and to know that the purpose of life is not to escape it, but to live it deeply. True freedom is not retirement, it is awakening. And once you awaken, you realize that you were never meant to wait for freedom. You were meant to live it.